Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is City Works, a co-production of the School of Labor and Urban Studies of the City University of New York and CUNY TV. Our program explores the lived experience of working people in New York and other urban areas. And today I am very pleased to offer this Reporters Roundtable on how labor and working people and people who'd like to be working or like to be working less fared last elections and what to expect next. To tackle the task, I am joined by four outstanding journalists. Michelle Chen is a contributing writer for both The Nation and In These Times. She's a contributing editor at Dissent magazine and co-produces and co-hosts two podcasts, Asia Pacific Forum and Dissent's wonderful Belabored. Jeet Heer serves as national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine and is the former senior editor at The New Republic. And Harold Meyerson, well, Harold has been an editor of the American Prospect for 20 years. He was also an op-ed columnist at the Washington Post from 2003 to 2015 and is no stranger to these roundtables. Juan Manuel Benitez is anchor and reporter for Spectrum News, New York Channel 1, and the host of Pura Politica, the current affairs program of NY1 Noticias. He's a frequent guest host on the Brian Lehrer Show, too. That's on Public Radio's WNYC in New York. So where do we begin? We could begin in lots of different places, but let's begin with what we think actually happened. There has been a lot of talk about incremental shifts in percentages of demographic votes for different candidates. In particular, a lot of media attention to the incremental increase in the vote count for the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, from various demographic groups who we are all surprised might have voted for Trump. But the big story surely is the epic turnout that we saw this election, such that President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris seem to have won a historic vote haul, some 76, I think, million votes, making it a history-breaking, record-breaking election by all accounts. Let's start with you, Harold. Your top takeaway from just the results so far.
Well, first, just a sigh of relief that Joe Biden won, and I do not think that the Trump people will be able to obstruct that, try though they may. I think that the 4 years of Donald Trump was guaranteed to increase turnout. You have to give Trump and the Republicans credit. They turned over rocks in order to find people who don't usually vote, who were mobilized, I won't say by the Trump message, since the message was kind of unclear, but by the Trump ethos of disdain for a lot of the changes going on in the country towards racial and gender equality, the rise of secularism, and so on. And that leaves us with a somewhat confounding situation.
All right, Juan Manuel, I have to get to you about that Latinx vote. I mean, extraordinary shift there, huge demographic group really making itself felt this election.
That's right, Laura. And I think we need to be really careful because we tell the same story. Every 4 years, we have to remind Americans that the Latino vote is not monolithic, and it is not like we cannot talk about the Latino vote the same way that we talk about the white vote and the Black vote. So we have an extremely complex Latinx community all over the country that is extremely different in every single different state where it is right now. And it doesn't look like the Latinx vote that Donald Trump got is higher than the share that George W. Bush got in 2004. So there's still a lot of work for Republicans to do if they want to increase their share of the Latino vote in this country.
Coming to you, Michelle, I mean, there's an awful lot of categories that a lot of people that fall into that category other. And in this election, more than ever, that other needs to be investigated. The Native American vote, Asian vote in lots of places got counted in other. And then, of course, this question of women, a category that has always been misleading. White women haven't voted majority for a Republican for decades, and yet every election it seems to be breaking news. It's breaking news. 55% of us, apparently, more than last time, a bigger proportion than last time, voted for Trump. White women, that is. We'll talk more about that, but your takeaways from the results so far as you know them, Michelle.
Yeah, I guess one of the main takeaways might be don't trust the polls, but in terms of the turnout of white women again for Trump. In the months leading up to the election, there was a narrative going around that Trump was losing suburban women, right? To the extent that Trump himself from the podium was sort of desperately reaching out to suburban women and pleading for them to vote for him because he would put their husbands back to work. And I guess it seems like a lot of maybe a lot of wasted energy trying to read the tea leaves based on conclusions that didn't really turn out to that didn't really materialize. And I still do think that after 2016, there was kind of a lot of soul searching going on with people deciding sort of, you know, what the hell is wrong with white women and how should we reach out to them. And I still think that there's still some work to be done there in terms of, I think there are whole swaths of this country that that people don't understand. And even activists that generally represent communities of color and marginalized communities really have to understand what's going on with white people in a way that perhaps isn't really as sexy in terms of understanding the electorate. But I think that Trump has kind of proven that you can have, I wouldn't say he's a true populist in any sense, but he has tapped into a vein of something that he continues to mine fairly successfully. Were it not for the events of the last few months of the pandemic, I mean, I think we would have been looking at a pretty different electoral outcome.
Yeah. Jeet, let me come to you. Jeet, here for a look at the labor vote. Union households, as usual, voted majority Democratic. I think Joe Biden, according to the Edison polls, got like 56% of union household votes. But Donald Trump seems to have gotten 40% of them. And of voters who said that the economy was the most important issue, a shocking 83% seem to have gone Trump's way. Again, without forgetting who seems to actually have won this election, and let's just say has won this election. What do you make of the continuing appeal of Trump, even in union, which is to say households that historically have been fairly politically educated, fairly politically engaged, and more reliable perhaps than other white voters to vote Democratic?
Yeah, well, it depends on which unions as well. Like I think, in Nevada, the sort of, Latino union workers, went, thanks in large part to the Sanders campaign, went, stuck with the Democrats. But I think it really depends on the campaign. And I think we haven't talked about the campaign. Biden campaigned on the unfitness of Donald Trump. And Trump campaigned on saying, well, I did good things for the economy. So Trump was able to talk about the economy in a way that Joe Biden did not.
Well, let me just ask you for more on that, Jeet, because I'm talking to you from a sort of rural area, not a sort of rural, one of the 6 most rural districts in America, upstate New York, just 100 miles from Wall Street, but barely undercovered in our mainstream media. We've got a local factory here with, I think, 100 cases of COVID right now. And yet a debate around closing the economy versus opening it that really Trump won. So
Yes.
Can we talk to that question? There was very little attention to people like those living around me who felt that only a Trump vote stood between them and bankruptcy or poverty or homelessness, even if the price they paid was getting sick.
Yeah, well, I think that the reason that they lost the COVID debate was that it was all about expertise. And this is the Democrats pitching themselves as a party for the suburban college-educated voters, will trust Dr. Fauci, will trust expertise. When in this crisis, what you need to do is offer people an alternative, offer them enough money so they can get through this, and then and say that we'll make the sacrifice for COVID, but we'll take care of you. That was something that Biden did not offer. And I'm here in Canada, and I have to say, like, the Liberal Party of Canada, even though it's a centrist Liberal Party, did a much better job of ensuring working class people that they would be taken care of. And that's something the Democrats did not say, and they suffered for that.
Harold, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think one of the questionable calls the Democrats made was Nancy Pelosi being unwilling to reach a deal with Republicans on a second tranche of COVID aid. But I want to also point out that union members don't necessarily view their union membership as their defining attribute. It may be their race if they feel that that's the more salient issue. And what I think we have to realize here, and there are some polls of individual states that suggest the union vote was not even in the Democrats' favor. The AP North survey shows Trump carrying the union vote in Pennsylvania. I think we have to be cognizant that you may be a union member, but you may feel also that the dominance of the white race or the dominance of men or what have you is somehow threatened by the Democrats. And in terms of the minority vote, keep in mind that there's a big gender gap across all racial categories. So it's not a one-factor election as to whether the unions did good or did not. That may not be the most salient concern of a lot of voters.
Well, Michelle,
I
coming to
think the
you, I mean, the
union-
union piece of it used to be, I think, not that you were in the household, that you stepped across the threshold, or that was a membership card owned by somebody in the family, but that you experienced some level of political education, and sometimes through labor-owned media. I mean, we're very excited to have this show. There's wonderful podcasts that are out there. Your podcast, Michelle, Belabored, does extraordinary educational work. But what role do you think, or what kind of a job do you think our traditional labor movement is doing these days on that political education piece?
I mean, I think the category of union voter, and I say this as someone who cares a lot about the labor movement, I think the category of union voter is increasingly pretty useless, not just because unions as a part of the workforce, the union represented sector of the workforce is shrinking continually, but because you have to look at, what sector do they work in? What are the demographics of the workforce? I mean, the face of the labor movement in terms of the fastest growing parts of it now are, women of color. I think maybe, one of the biggest symbols of how sort of irrelevant unions have become as a grassroots political force was in the Black Lives Matter protests that were roiling the country, and the AFL-CIO. I mean, the biggest statement that they made came after somebody set their headquarters on fire during the middle of the protest. I mean, not really labor's finest hour in terms of becoming a relevant force.
Thanks, Michelle. If people want to find out more about the backstory on that, I urge them to check out our last episode, or maybe it was 2 episodes ago, of City Works, where we talked about exactly that. I think I'm going to shift now to where do we go next? How do we act, and how do we organize, particularly as people who care about workers, working people, and people who might like in the future either to work more or to work less? I had a chance to speak for my own program with Mary Kay Henry, the president of the SEIU, and she had this to say about the normality that we were promised. She doesn't actually want us to go back there. Here's Mary Kay.
Yeah, I have to tell you, again, we refuse to return to thinking about the past as a measure for what we should expect in the present. And because the depth of the crisis is so beyond anything anybody's ever experienced, and we've just seen huge shifts happen in the last 8 months. $3 trillion was released from the federal government in a 6-month period and went mostly to corporations and the wealthy. We have to be as bold and transformative in how we tackle the crisis for everybody in this nation. And so we intend to stay in the streets, to double down on organizing of non-union workers, of uniting our fights across movement, and expecting federal and state government to do bold transformational change in all aspects of our lives.
So my obvious follow-up question to her on my program, and you can check it out at lauraflanders.org or on PBS stations or on YouTube, was how do you do that when you didn't have the big blue tsunami that many people were expecting, either in the Senate or the House? Lost about half a dozen House seats, retained a majority, but it's smaller. And looks like the Republicans will probably retain their edge in the Senate, although we don't know. 2 Senate seats are up for deciding in January. So Jeet, to you on that, how do we go from here to the next place?
Well, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that there was an anti-Trump majority and a strong majority. It's very rare to unseat a sitting president, but that the Democrats as a party failed. And I think that they failed because they just ran on anti-Trump and they kind of splintered their own coalition. If you remember the Democratic convention, it was this, I call it the second Republican convention, because they had John Kasich and they had a lot of Republicans. And so that strategy of trying to appeal to Republicans to defeat Trump, it achieved its goal, but it weakened the Democratic Party. So the next goal is the Democrats have to run not just against Trump, but they have to run against Republicans. And you need outside forces to force them to do that. You need this sort of cold, I think Joe Biden was really saved by activists in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, who really got out the vote in a way that he himself was not able to do, and Hillary Clinton wasn't. So we have to really take those activist forces and get them to work against the Democratic Party to force them to become a more progressive party.
All those places that you mentioned, and of course, Nevada and Arizona. I mean, Juan, coming to you, there's the Democratic Party organizing, and then there's the movement organizing that we always look to elections to either hurt or help. But when we're talking about a labor, working class, multiracial, diverse, cross-sectoral coalition of the sort that Mary Kay Henry would love to be creating, where are we and where does it go in this context?
Laura, we're just seeing how the Democrats, right after the election, are throwing all those groups under the bus. They needed all those progressive groups and labor groups and immigrant communities and working communities to really unite so they could help Joe Biden get to the White House. Right after the election results, the Democrats win, but never underestimate the ability that Democrats have to self-sabotage, right? So they don't even need the Republicans to attack them. Democrats are attacking Democrats right now. They are questioning whether they went too far with slogans, with Medicare for all, with immigration reform, with defund the police. While Democrats are fighting with each other, right now you have a Republican Party that is standing behind a president that is denying reality, denying the results of the election, and undermining every single fundamental institution of American democracy. And Republicans are telling reporters on background, listen, we know that Joe Biden won, don't worry, we're just walking the president through his feelings, and sooner or later, he'll admit that he lost the election. Well, while they are doing that, Republicans are taking advantage of this moment of creating an alternative universe, delegitimizing the results of the election, creating that truth, that alternative truth, that these results are not legitimate. And they're going to use that narrative for the next 4 years of divided government. Like you said, Laura's Republicans most likely will keep control of the Senate. They're going to use this narrative to boycott any single left-wing or center-left measure that Joe Biden is going to try to put forward.
So is that what we have to look forward to, Harold? I mean, I know that you've heard this very critique before. I feel like we've had this discussion every election. But in this case, a chill just went up my spine as I thought of what Juan Manuel was saying. We could start having journalists referring to people who are not believers in the results of the last election in the way that we have people who are not believers in climate change or not believers in evolution. We can't normalize this constituency, can we?
No, we absolutely cannot. And there's really, I mean, the only precedent I can think of, which was not a denial of reality, but a secession from reality, was, of course, the South secession after Lincoln was elected in 1860. I think a lot of what we may have to focus on is getting blue states and blue cities to push the envelope. And, you know, the conflicts within the Democratic Party will also play out on that level. In California, in New York, there's considerable difference between the progressive Democrats and the centrist Democrats, though the Democrats in aggregate are in control. And so I think some of the movement's focus, even if we win Georgia, because there's still, you know, a limit to what the Democrats could do with 50 votes plus Kamala Harris in the Senate, is going to have to be at the state level. And, you know, in a sense, pushing the states to be more progressive widens this division in the United States. But we have to, you know, we have to demonstrate that our ideas work. And if we can only demonstrate that on the state level, let's go for it.
We're coming towards the end of our time, and we have to end, I think, where we began, which was on the question of race and racism and how it operates in America. We like to talk about demographic groups and race as a kind of static thing, but I think we need to be grappling with the way racism functions in our elections and where maybe neoliberalism, the class critique, the labor critique fails to function. Or maybe you could flip it around and tell me, did you see examples of a kind of solidarity being created across racial lines, across lines of racist ideology and demagoguery that would be helpful going forward? Because we're looking at a pandemic, a recession, and an administration, the Joe Biden part of which has, you know, thinks he knows how to deal with a crisis like this one, because he was here in 2008 and 9, and we remember what didn't happen then. Jeet, to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there are sort of very positive stories in terms of Georgia, particularly, that is offering a kind of model for where you can mobilize, you know, in a state that has historically been, you know, had a terrible history of racism, really mobilize African-American voters, but also bring in white voters to the Democratic coalition. So I think, but I mean, I think that precisely happened because you had a strong state party. And I think, you know, there's nothing to stop that from happening in a place like Florida, except that many of the state parties are sclerotic, they're very dysfunctional or corrupt. And I think that's where the progress is going to have to come from.
Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of local races that were definitely inspiring. I mean, we see groups like the DSA, of which I am a member, having a lot of local victories. Yes, on the state legislatures in New York, even, which has at least, you know, historically had one of the most corrupt state legislatures in the country, probably. And so I think 2016 energized people to really look harder at local races and not fixate on the presidency so much. And my fear going forward is that now that Democrats are in control of the White House, you know, at least as far as we know,
maybe,
that it will lead to another sort of wave of complacency in which Democrats feel that they can take the constituencies that put them in office for granted, and in another 4 years, who knows what will happen? Who knows what right-wing demagogue will be put forward?
Harold, to you.
I think we can't dismiss the fact that ever since Bernie Sanders announced his candidacy in 2015, the American left has really become revitalized. It's larger. It's a, you know, substantial group within the Democratic Party, and it's not going away. You know, so I mean, there is a massive shift in what Democrats believe over the last 5 years, and it's you know, something that we should take pride in. And I don't think it's going away. And I think that's going to be something of a break on Democratic centrists. We'll just have to see.
Juan Manuel?
I believe that the Democrats are extremely good at symbolism, but then when it comes to pragmatism, Republicans are way better, right? So Democrats got a symbolic victory with Kamala Harris, right? She's the first woman, the first woman of color, all those things that are amazingly great for the history of this country. But now when it comes to what are you gonna do for Black women now? What are you gonna do for working women? What are you gonna do for Latino women? So are those policies catering to those demographic groups that are part of your base, the Democratic Party? Are those policies too radical for the alternative universe that Republicans and conservatives are creating, where truth doesn't really matter and facts don't really matter. So Democrats are going to be they're going to have to be extremely pragmatic, like you said. Legislatures in Republican hands in many states all over the country, they're going to get to do the redistricting. So Republicans are going to be extremely focused on how do we retake the House and how do we redraw districts so we have an advantage. So hopefully, so we have a better balance of power. Democrats are going to be paying attention to those things the same way that they pay attention to symbolic feats for the history of this country.
Thank you, Michelle Chen, Jeet, Heer, Harold Meyerson, Juan, Manuel, Benitez. Thank you for sharing your insights and your knowledge in this crazy time of transition. It is good to know, while so much is uncertain, that we can count on you. I urge viewers to support our guest publications, magazines, podcasts, programs like this one. Unbowed, unbought, unbeholden to Big Pharma or any other media monopoly, independent media is going to be more critical than ever in these times. So thank you for watching CityWorks. CityWorks is a co-production of the School of Labor and Urban Studies at the City University of New York and CUNY TV. If you have questions or comments, you can reach us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders.